Two muddy Land Rover Defenders roared into the compound. A man with a long scar across his right eye, his face grim, slowly emerged. He's known as Le Chiffre, a ruthless money launderer for terrorist organizations. This time, Mystery Man Mr. White introduced him to the rebels. Le Chiffre just pocketed $100 million from the insurgency, immediately called in his crew, ordering them to short the stock of an airline. But his aide reported the airline's stock was rising, not falling, meaning a massive loss if they shorted it. Le Chiffre, however, was confident he had a plan to make it drop. Under the scorching Malagasy sun, a crowd of locals were captivated by a snake-fighting spectacle, a popular local pastime. Bond and his contact, Vesper Lind, were discreetly watching a ruthless bomb maker. The terrorist's face was a roadmap of burns, a testament to his years of playing with fire. The terrorist got a coded message, just 3 dots. The second he saw it, he turned to leave, but then he spotted agents tailing him. He took off running. Bond was on him like white on rice, chasing him through a construction site, up onto a high suspension bridge, and then back down to the streets. The terrorist was fast, but Bond doesn't give up. He's all about grit and endurance, and he wasn't letting this guy get away. The terrorist thought he was safe, holed up in his own country's consulate. But Bond wasn't about to let him get away with it. He hopped onto a truck, vaulted over the consulate walls, and stormed the place. No hesitation. Bond bursts into the consul's office, takes down the terrorist, and drags him out. The consul hit the panic button, his face etched with fear. Suddenly, soldiers armed with AK-47 stormed out, firing at Bond. Bond, dragging a terrorist hostage, made it to the back courtyard, only to find it swarming with troops. He let the terrorist go, then in a flash, whipped out a hidden pistol, shooting him dead. He then fired at a nearby propane tank. When the consul looked up, Bond was gone without a trace. Bond found a ready-made bomb and a cell phone in the terrorist's pocket. He also saw a text message with that same 3-dot code. Because of all the chaos 7 caused in Africa, the head of MI6 is furious. You should have captured him alive and questioned who bought the bomb. Now that's good, the clue is broken. She's so angry that she's even reminiscing about the Cold War, saying back then, rogue agents like Bond would have been executed for treason. When the female leader gets home, she's shocked to find Bond casually waiting in her living room. Still fuming, she unleashes her fury on him. She lays into the newly minted 7, pointing out his glaring flaws, blind arrogance, and an overinflated ego. She gives Bond an indefinite leave of absence to think about what he's done and warns him never to show up at her house again. But Bond's visit isn't social. Before she arrived home, he secretly used her computer access to trace the location of a text message sent to the terrorist's phone, the Oceans Club on Paradise Island in the Bahamas. Bond decides to follow this lead on his own, determined to find the mastermind pulling the strings. He arrives in the Bahamas, driving a Ford Model A straight to the Oceans Club. This Model A is the latest model, super stylish and modern for its time. As he pulls up to the hotel, Bond bends down, pretending to tie his shoe, but he's checking out the security cameras. 2 snooty old guys mistake him for a valet. Bond slams their Land Rover Range Rover Sport right through the parking lot barrier, setting off a chorus of car alarms. As security rushes out to investigate, Bond slips into the now empty surveillance room. He checks the timestamp on the text message, 7:12 p.m., July 6th. Rewinding the security footage from that day, he spots a man exiting a vintage 1974 Aston Martin DB5, typing away on his phone at that exact moment. Bond strolls up to the front desk and tells the clerk he accidentally bumped into an Aston Martin and wants to apologize to the owner. The clerk, a bit of a gossip, spills all the tea, the guy's name, age, address, personality, and even his hobbies. Bond learns the texter's name is Dimitrios. He heads to Dimitrios' beachfront property, where he's greeted by a beautiful woman riding a white horse, Solange, Dimitrios' wife. With his chiseled physique and seductive gaze, Bond immediately catches Solange's eye. Charming married women is kind of his thing. Back in his room, Bond uses his MI6 network to dig up dirt on Dimitrios, eventually uncovering a link to Le Chiffre. That night, Bond hits the hotel casino where, wouldn't you know it, Dimitrios is gambling. Bond joins his table. A little while later, Solange arrives, but Bond notices a definite chill between the couple. On one hand, Dimitrios bets his Aston Martin. He's got a strong hand and looks confident he'll win. He gives Bond a smug look. Bond smiles and calls the bet. Dimitrios flips over 2 kings, a great hand. He looks at Bond with a triumphant grin, but that grin fades fast when Bond reveals 2 aces. Bond wins. Dimitrios is furious. He gets a note, glances at it, and abruptly leaves like something's up. The guy meeting Dimitrios is Le Chiffre. Turns out, they're working together. Dimitrios supplied the bomb-making terrorist, but Le Chiffre is the real mastermind behind it all. He's the one who bought the bomb. This explains why he was so sure about the airline stock crashing. He's planning to bomb the airport to manipulate the market. Le Chiffre is unhappy with Dimitrios, so Dimitrios promises to find a replacement. Meanwhile, Bond has successfully seduced Solange. 7 is smooth. He not only wins the guy's car, he wins over his wife. But Bond isn't just indulging. He's pumping Solange for info about Dimitrios' next move. She reveals Dimitrios is going to a museum on Miami Boulevard that night. Bond makes an excuse to send Solange home and races to the location. Dimitrios arrives at the museum and checks a black briefcase, receiving a numbered tag, 53. Bond tails him discreetly and sees Dimitrios place the tag on a roulette table in a gaming exhibit. Just as Bond's getting a closer look, Dimitrios spots him and puts a knife to his back. They struggle silently, but Bond quickly overpowers Dimitrios and grabs his phone. The most recent message sent from the phone is 3 dots. Looks like Bond found the right guy. But when he checks the roulette table, tag 53 is gone. Bond curses under his breath and sprints to the coat check. The black briefcase is also gone. Bursting through the front doors, Bond is met by a crowd. He quickly uses Dimitrios' phone to call the last dialed number. A young man in a dark jacket answers. He's carrying a briefcase. It's him. Bond tailed the terrorist to the airport. He noticed something strange about the briefcase the terrorist was carrying. It sailed right through security. Bond realized it wasn't a bomb inside, but an airport security uniform. The terrorist changed into a uniform, punched a secret code into a keypad, and slipped through a restricted access door. Bond, stuck outside, didn't know the code. Suddenly, he remembered the 3 dots he'd seen on a phone earlier. He tried it. The door opened. Turns out, those 3 dots were the airport's internal access code. Now disguised as airport security, the terrorist drove a fuel truck. He planted a bomb, cleverly disguised as a key fob, onto the truck and sped toward a brand new airliner, the pride of the airline's fleet. At the last second, Bond leaps onto the truck. A fierce struggle ensues. The terrorist breaks free and jumps off. Bond slams on the brakes, but they've been sabotaged. The truck barrels towards the plane. Thinking fast, Bond cranks the wheel hard, narrowly avoiding the plane. The truck screeches to a halt beside the airliner. The police swarm in and arrest Bond. The terrorist glared at Bond from a distance, a smug look on his face. He pressed the detonator on his phone, but instead of the plane exploding, he heard a beeping coming from himself. Bond had swiftly planted the bomb on the terrorist. The plane was safe. Le Chiffre's plan to manipulate the stock market had failed, costing him over $100 million. He maintained a calm exterior, but inside, he was furious. He knew there had to be a leak, a traitor in his midst. The next morning, Bond discovered Solange's body on the beach near the Oceans Club. M, the head of MI6, arrived on the scene. Since Bond had just prevented a major terrorist attack, she briefed him on his next assignment. Le Chiffre, a private banker to global terrorists, had lost a fortune of their money. To recoup his losses, he was organizing a high-stakes poker game at Casino Royale in Montenegro. Only 10 players were invited, each required to buy in for a staggering $15 million. The winner would take all, a cool $150 million. Le Chiffre is a high-stakes gambler who needs to win big to recoup his losses. Their leader decides to send Bond to play against him. The plan is to bankrupt Le Chiffre and then offer him protection by MI6 in exchange for vital intelligence. The British government stakes Bond with $15 million, but because it's such a huge amount, the Treasury dispatches a female agent to keep an eye on him and make sure he doesn't blow the budget. The gorgeous partner, Vesper Lind, is smart and alluring, but her first impression of Bond isn't great. She doesn't trust him, so instead of giving him all the money at once, she only hands over $10 million. Bond is not thrilled. On the way to Montenegro, they constantly bicker. "Don't worry, you're not my type." "Smart?" "Yes." Single? No. Arriving at the hotel, Bond receives the keys to his special ride. Finally, his iconic companion makes an appearance. A silver Aston Martin DBS. It's got a 6-liter V12 engine, a 6-speed Graziano manual transmission, over 500 horsepower, and goes 0 to 60 in 4.3 seconds. Being a 7 special, the hidden compartment contains a medkit, antidotes, and a silenced Browning HP pistol. Bond and Vesper connect with Mathis, their local contact. He's their only ally here. Thanks to Mathis's help, Bond smoothly enters the poker game. Early on, he loses consistently. But he notices a small tell Le Chiffre has when he's about to bluff. His left eye twitches slightly, and he rubs his eyebrow to try and hide it. Bond figures he can use this tell to his advantage later on. He orders a martini from the server, showing he's a man of refined taste. During a break in the game, Le Chiffre returns to his room. Unbeknownst to him, the furious African warlord is waiting for him. He gives Le Chiffre one day to return the money or he'll kill him. As the leader leaves, he spots Bond and Vesper eavesdropping next door. Bond and Vesper find themselves in a deadly chase. A brutal fight erupts in the stairwell, taking them from the top floor down. The warlord reaches for a dropped gun. Seeing the danger, Vesper rushes in and helps Bond knock the gun away. Bond then chokes the leader to death. As an accountant who's never killed anyone, Vesper is shaken and terrified after witnessing the brutal scene. She hides in the shower, desperately trying to wash the blood off, but it feels futile. Seeing her like this, Bond feels a pang of sympathy. He sits beside her and holds her close, offering comfort. Even Bond's icy heart seems to be melting a little. Back at the poker game, the 5 community cards are 2 queens, 2 kings, and an ace. Bond holds a king and an ace, giving him 3 kings and 2 aces, a full house, and a very strong hand. Seeing Le Chiffre's hesitant frown, Bond bets $2 million. Le Chiffre thinks for a moment, then goes all in. The pressure is on Bond. If he folds, he loses the $2 million she's already bet. If he calls, he has to match Le Chiffre's all-in bet. Bond sees Le Chiffre rub his eyebrow and assumes he's bluffing, so he pushes all his chips in and reveals his hand. Full house, 3 kings and 2 aces. Le Chiffre flips his cards. He has 2 queens, giving him 4 queens with the community cards, 4 of a kind, which beats a full house. Le Chiffre wins the entire pot. Before leaving, he gives Bond a knowing look. "You thought I was bluffing, mister." Bond? Bond, having lost all $10 million, is furious. He asks Vesper for the remaining $5 million to continue playing, but she thinks he's being reckless and arrogant and refuses. Just as Bond is fuming, a smug Le Chiffre walks by. Enraged, Bond grabs a knife and goes after him, but he's stopped by a burly, bearded man. Turns out, the guy is a fellow agent, CIA. His name is Felix Leiter. Leiter busted out of the game even faster than Bond, and almost broke himself. He offers Bond a deal. Leiter will give Bond his remaining funds, and if they win, Le Chiffre belongs to the CIA. What about the winnings? Bond asks. Leiter smirks. You think we Americans are short on cash? Bond, now flush with Leiter's money, returns to the game. This time, he's on a roll, winning big. Le Chiffre starts to panic and resorts to dirty tricks. He has someone poison Bond's martini. Bond, unsuspecting, takes a sip and immediately feels the effects. He stumbles away from the table, fighting for his life. He grabs a glass and a salt shaker from a nearby dining table and races to the bathroom. Bond is dizzy and disoriented. He gulps down salt water and throws up. Staggering back to his car, he calls Mi-6 headquarters. Following the doctor's instructions, he injects himself with an antidote, but when he tries to use the defibrillator, it won't turn on. He realizes the power cord isn't plugged in. His heart stops, and he collapses. Just in time, Vesper arrives. She frantically plugs in the defibrillator and shocks him back to life. Bond, barely conscious, immediately returns to the poker game. Le Chiffre can't believe his eyes. Only Bond and Le Chiffre remain at the table. They're in the showdown. The community cards are ace, 4, 6, and 8. This time, Bond goes all in first. Le Chiffre looks at his hand, smiles and calls. The pot is now a staggering $150 million. It all comes down to this hand. Le Chiffre reveals his cards first, 2 aces and a 6. A full house, 3 aces and a pair of sixes. A monster hand. He looks at Bond triumphantly, certain of his victory. Bond reveals his hand. A 5 and a 7, both of spades. A straight flush. It beats a full house. Bond wins. Le Chiffre storms off in disgust. Bond, feeling generous, tips the dealer $500,000. Not that it's his money anyway. As Bond leaves the hotel, he sees Vesper being kidnapped. He races to his Aston Martin DBS and takes off after them. Speeding over a hill, he's horrified to see Vesper lying unconscious on the road. He swerves violently, the car flips and rolls, and he loses consciousness. Bond is dragged into a deserted warehouse, stripped naked and tied to a chair. Le Chiffre shows up and starts torturing him, trying to get Bond to reveal his bank account password. Bond's put through absolute hell, but he grits his teeth and doesn't give up a single word. Just then, the warehouse door swings open, and in walks Mr. White, Le Chiffre's partner. He shoots Le Chiffre dead. When Bond wakes up, the first person he sees is Vesper. By this point, she's fallen for him, and he's already head over heels for her too. The manager of Casino Royale meets with Bond to transfer his $150 million winnings. He asks Bond to enter the password to complete the transfer. Bond asks Vesper to do it for him. The password is Vesper's name. This final act breaks down her last defenses. She's deeply in love with him too. They spend an amazing time together, and Bond thinks he's finally ready to leave his dangerous life behind and settle down with the woman he loves. On the train to Venice, Bond writes a resignation letter to M. But a seasoned agent like him can't just walk away. Their tragic fate was sealed from the beginning. Later that day, Vesper goes out shopping, leaving Bond alone in their hotel room. He receives a call from M that shatters his dreams. M asks why the massive sum of money hasn't been transferred to the government's account yet. Bond was sure the transfer was initiated when he gave Vesper the password. Panicked, he rushes out to find her. He finally found her in a dark alley, but it was too late. Vesper had just handed over a briefcase full of cash to some shadowy organization. They spotted Bond, and a brutal shootout erupted inside this dilapidated old building. The place was so run down that Bond accidentally punctured some support airbags in the foundation during the fight. The whole building started slowly collapsing into the water. Bond took out the bad guys, but Vesper was trapped in an old, rickety elevator as it plunged into the depths. Overcome with guilt and wanting to be free, she wanted to be free. Bond managed to pull Vesper's body from the water, but despite his efforts, she was gone. And the $150 million vanished. Snagged by a mysterious Mr. White. M called Bond with the heartbreaking truth about Vesper. Turns out, she had a boyfriend, someone she was deeply in love with. After Bond's casino win, the shadowy organization pulling Le Chiffre's strings kidnapped her lover, forcing Vesper to steal back the money. She had no choice, but in a cruel twist of fate, she'd also fallen for Bond. Torn apart by guilt and impossible choices, she decided to seek death. The news hardened Bond, turning him back into the cold, ruthless agent. He buried his grief deep inside, but before returning home, he vowed to find the real mastermind. He discovered a text on Vesper's phone, a message from Mr. White. He'd start there. A sleek, black Jaguar Series 8 purred to a stop in front of a luxurious villa. Under the hood roared a powerful 4-liter V8 engine, capable of launching the car from 0 to 100 in under 6.9 seconds. Mr. White stepped out, taking a moment to enjoy the picturesque surroundings. Suddenly, his phone rang. "Hello?" A cool voice on the other end said, "Mr. White? Who is this?" White demanded. "Bond. James Bond." And with that, Bond, seemingly out of nowhere, took a shot from above, killing Mr. White in an almost anticlimactic fashion. And that's all for today's story. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you thought of the movie in the comments below.